Hey guys, it's Misty from the Book Rat, and to kick off Fairytale Fortnight, I have for you my top 10 favorite fairytale retellings. Number 10, Wicked by Gregory Maguire. I consider all of the Wizard of Oz stories to be sort of modern fairy tales, and I think most people do. They're so popular and so well known and loved, and kind of use the same elements of fairy tales that they've worked into our psyche, and I think are something that people are going to know for generations. Even if they don't know all of the tales, they're going to know the basic elements and know who, the Wicked Witch of the West is and things like that. And I love a tale that flips things on its head or looks at things from the villain's point of view and tries to make everything more understandable and see how the villain could be misunderstood, or maybe they were the wronged party. And I think Gregory Maguire does that brilliantly. And also the world building in it is just absolutely fantastic. So while it may not be a fairy tale retelling in the most direct sense, I think it definitely deserves a spot on the list and is a favorite for a reason. Number 9, The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly. This is not a direct fairy tale retelling. It more sort of touches on fairy tales and touches on the fairy tale aspect in our lives and sort of the whole history of the oral tradition and the sort of common tropes and characters in fairy tales. It's an adult book, but it easily crosses over to YA. Its main character is a 12-year-old. It's very, very much a dark book, and goes some places that you don't necessarily want your own 12-year-old reading, which is why it is an adult book and why it works for adults even though the main character is so young. But it's very sorrowful and probing, really moving, but also kind of magical, and captures the sort of tone of fairy tale storytelling really well. But it's just one of those that will really stick with you and kind of work its way into your brain, and things will pop up that you say, oh hey, that's from a fairy tale, or that's very similar to such and such. But it's not overwhelming in that. It's very much just its own story and a fantasy that kind of encompasses this world. Number 8, A Curse Dark as Gold by Elizabeth C. Bunce. This is a retelling of Rumpelstiltskin, which is one of the most fascinating tales to me, and which I always loved, and I think is an interesting one to try to tackle. I've read a few really good short story retellings of it, but you don't necessarily get a full-length retelling. This one is set in the Industrial Revolution, which was a really interesting twist and interesting backdrop to the whole thing. It's a slow mover, kind of slow burning, and something that you savor a little bit. It's not necessarily a book to tear through, but it's very atmospheric, and I really connected to the main characters. It unraveled a tiny bit at the end for me, but for the most part, it's one of those that really stuck with me, and I can kind of still picture the characters or picture the scenes. Bunce used the tale really skillfully, and made it seem very important and very sort of weighted, which was nice, and I liked that. Number 7, The Castle Waiting series by Linda Medley. This is a graphic novel series, and very light, very fun. It follows these sort of side characters and people who would have been like hanging out in the wings of the actual fairy tales. So you don't necessarily get, Cinderella or Snow White or Prince Charming. You get their lackeys or their neighbors or whoever in this very quirky, very kind of silly, very interesting and dynamic world. There's a definite feminist streak to it, which I liked, but it's not overbearing, it's not beating you over the head with it. It's just a really fun embracing of fairy tales that just makes me feel warm and fuzzy. I like the whole series. Number 6, Shadows on the Moon by Zoe Marriott. This is a retelling of Cinderella, but it's set in a sort of fantasy stylized version of feudal Japan. It's a very interesting use of the tale, and another one where I think it stands on its own. The elements from Cinderella are very present and very clear, but even if you don't like fairy tales or feel like Cinderella's overdone, it's definitely its own thing, and doesn't use the tale as a crutch. My favorite thing about it, though, is that Zoe didn't hold back. It definitely goes some very dark places and tackles some very tough material, and it does it unflinchingly, which I really respect. There's a completeness to it. You know, there's a struggle with the characters, and they have to grow and be dynamic, and, you know, of course I love that. It's interesting how the relationship forms, you know, between the Cinderella character and the sort of Prince Charming character, and it's believable, which I think is one of the things that a lot of the Cinderella retellings struggle with, because the story at its core is kind of outlandish. The main character, Suzume, she just kind of captured my heart, and you feel for her and you root for her and know that the path she's going down isn't the best for her, but at the same time it's completely understandable, and it's just a really well-developed tale that's not afraid to explore the darker aspects of fairy tales. And I mean, fairy tales are actually very dark. If you move past the Disney sanitized versions, they're all about, you know, mutilation and cannibalism and child neglect and rape, and not the most pleasant things. So I liked that she was willing to embrace that and use it effectively.